America opens a new chapter in its history and brings to a close an old, painful one. Early morning on January 20th, 1981. Sleepless, tense, totally preoccupied, and only hours away from handing over the White House to Ronald Reagan, President Jimmy Carter pushes for the release of the 52 Americans held hostage in Iran for the past 444 days.
Everyone in that room had been up for 2 days and 2 nights. So many details had cropped up that threatened to thwart the whole negotiation. It was like a scene out of a movie, almost unreal and eerie. Here President Carter was in the waning hours and minutes of his administration, not even having time to reflect on his presidency or his last hours in the White House or his last several hours at his desk, but waiting and listening and talking and prodding to try to have this agreement consummated by the time he left office.
Right on, man. That's great. That's great. Okay, now...
The negotiations are successful.
The money's in the bank. Our action is complete. Iran's being notified through Algeria that the money's there.
But as Carter waits for confirmation that the hostages are free, he has to prepare for the inauguration. As he greets his successor at the White House, Carter tells Reagan that the hostages are to be freed at any time, but that no announcement can be made yet.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
I congratulate you, sir.
As a government, not the other way around.
With his new conservative agenda, Reagan promises the most sweeping political shift since Franklin Delano Roosevelt created the New Deal in the 1930s.
It is time to check and reverse the growth of government, which shows signs of having grown beyond the consent of the governed. It is my intention to curb the size and influence of the federal establishment and to demand recognition of the distinction between the powers granted to the federal government and those reserved to the states or to the people. Let us begin an era of national renewal. Let us renew our determination, our courage, and our strength. And let us renew our faith and our hope. We have every right to dream heroic dreams. Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look.
As a slap at Carter, Iran waits until Reagan is president before releasing the hostages.
Some 30 minutes ago, the planes bearing our prisoners left Iranian airspace and are now free of Iran.
And I thought because of the
Back in Plains, Georgia, Carter can tell the crowd that at last his efforts have paid off.
Just a few moments ago, on Air Force One, before we landed Warner Robins, I had received word officially for the first time that the aircraft carrying the 52 American hostages had cleared Iranian airspace on the first leg of a journey home, and that every one of the 52 hostages was alive, was well, and free.
Just how much we care.
Revenge doesn't ever bring happiness, but understanding and peace does.
The next day, Carter arrives in Wiesbaden, West Germany, to welcome the former hostages to freedom.
Our Americans in Iran were mistreated much worse than has been previously revealed. The acts of barbarism which were perpetrated on our people by Iran can never be condoned.
After a week of private reunions and debriefings at West Point, the former hostages are ready to go out into the world. The first stop is Washington.
I'm told that Sergeant Lopez here put up a sign in his cell, a sign that normally would have been torn down by those guards. But this one was written in Spanish, and his guards didn't know that Viva la Roja, Blanco y Azul means long live the red, white, and blue.
Mr. President, in very simple words that come from the hearts of all of us, it is good to be back. Thank you, America, and God bless all of you. Thank you very much.
This administration did not come here to be a caretaker government and just hope we could go along the same way and maybe do it a little better. We think the time has come where there has to be a change of direction of this country, and it's going to begin with reducing government spending.
Reagan sets out to change the way America does business, and his biggest challenge is the chaos in the economy.
It's time to recognize that we've come to a turning point. We're threatened with an economic calamity of tremendous proportions, and the old business-as-usual treatment can't save us. Together, we must chart a different course. We must increase productivity. That means making it possible for industry to modernize and make use of the technology which we ourselves invented. That means putting Americans back to work, and that means, above all, bringing government spending back within government revenues, which is the only way, together with increased productivity, that we can reduce and, yes, eliminate inflation.
With inflation at 12% and nearly 8 million unemployed, his supply-side theory is a bold new way to jumpstart the economy back to health.
And we must realize there is no quick fix. At the same time, however, we cannot delay in implementing an economic program aimed at both reducing tax rates to stimulate productivity and reducing the growth in government spending to reduce unemployment and inflation.
Well, we have looked at every department and agency and every program from A to Z, and there are some important changes that need to be made in entitlements, but there is...
Charged with making Reagan's theories work is 34-year-old budget director David Stockman.
We intend to make substantial reductions in the Department of Energy. We've looked at a whole variety of business, commercial, and economic development subsidies that we don't think are very cost-effective or very justifiable when you're cutting back on people programs. We intend to cut those severely, and if you add all these measures together, you do end up with the tens of billions that we need to reduce from the budget in order to get it balanced and get inflationary pressures coming down.
social programs will be slashed, but not the military. With Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger, the U.S. sees the beginning of a massive military buildup that will shift the balance of the federal budget in order to counter the growing Soviet military strength.
We think that it is necessary to look at the world situation, and we don't think that it is either reasonable or prudent to view the Soviet military buildup that has occurred and is occurring as defensive in nature. I think it would be dangerously naive if we expected the Soviet Union, once it achieves clear military superiority, not to try to exploit that military capability even more fully than they're doing now.
Less than 2 months after taking office, Reagan is the target of an assassin.
The doctors have come out and given a preliminary report to Mrs. Reagan, and their word is that his condition is good and it is stable. As they were wheeling him into surgery, he saw Meese and Baker and Deaver there, and he said, "Who's minding the store?" And then when he got into the operating room, he looked at the doctors and he said, "Please tell me you're Republicans."
That I will be present here.
At the White House, Reagan's condition is on everybody's mind.
The president has a gunshot wound in the left side of the chest. He is in stable condition. Jim Brady has been shot. It is a head wound. We have no information on his condition.
They're necessary at this time.
Alexander Haig makes a statement he'll regret for years when he forgets to include the Speaker of the House ahead of himself in the order of succession.
Who is making the decisions for the government right now? Who's making the decisions?
Constitutionally, gentlemen, you have the President, the Vice President, and the Secretary of State in that order. And should the President decide he wants to transfer the helm to the Vice President, he will do so. As of now, I am in control here in the White House, pending return of the Vice President, and in close touch with him. If something came up, I would check with him, of course.
His recovery is rapid, and his stature with the American people soars.
How do you feel? Great.
But Press Secretary James Brady never fully recovers. Reagan's deranged assailant is a 25-year-old loner named John Hinckley. His motive is not political. Obsessed with actress Jodie Foster, Hinckley shoots Reagan, desperately trying to impress her. In the end, Hinckley goes to a mental hospital, and Reagan goes back on the job.
All we need to begin with is a dream.
Then, another assassination attempt shocks the world. In Rome, Polish Pope John Paul II is gunned down and seriously wounded by 2 bullets while riding in the Vatican's St. Peter's Square. A 23-year-old Turkish terrorist and convicted murderer, Mehmet Ali Agca, is quickly apprehended. After enduring a 5-hour operation and fighting off a high fever, the Pope pulls through. Just 3 weeks after the shooting, the Pope appears on his balcony to bless a jubilant crowd.
Yasak var.
Durumumu görünüz işte.
This time, the motive is political, and Aja's story is clouded with intrigue. Evidence links Aja to terrorist groups, but at first, he insists he acted alone. At his trial, Aja is found guilty and is sentenced to life imprisonment. Over the next 2 years, investigators discover Aja's links are to the Bulgarian and Soviet KGB. Italian authorities believe the Russians wanted the Pope dead because of his support of the Solidarity movement in Poland. The Pope fully recovers. On a different note, television is changed forever when music videos hit the air. Some are crudely produced by today's standards, but then the new art form gets a boost when a 24-hour station called MTV debuts.
What we've introduced with MTV is a non-narrative form, as opposed to conventional television where you rely on plot and continuity. We rely on mood and emotion. We make you feel a certain way as opposed to you walking away with any particular knowledge.
A huge industry is born, turning many recording artists into video stars as well.
How did I get here?
Conspicuous member of a superb
One familiar video star signs off. For 2 decades, Walter Cronkite was welcomed in living rooms across the country.
I'm not even going away.
Cronkite leaves his post as anchorman at CBS Evening News when he reaches the mandatory retirement age of 65.
Old anchormen, you see, don't fade away. They just keep coming back for more.
Technology makes machines smaller and simpler, changing the way Americans work and play. In the 70s, teenagers Steve Jobs and Stephen Wozniak, tinkering in a California garage, invent the circuitry that becomes the brain of the revolutionary Apple computer.
The penalty for failure for going and trying to start a company in this valley is non-existent. There really isn't a penalty for failure either psychologically or economically, in the sense that if you have a good idea and you go out to start your own company, even if you fail, you're generally considered worth more to the company you left because you've gained all this valuable experience in many disciplines.
The mushrooming industry gives birth to a new high-tech cult and a place called Silicon Valley. Dozens of competitors spring up with new machines, hoping to grab a piece of the rapidly growing market. Then, when giant IBM introduces its own personal computer in 1981, the PC world is finally taken seriously. Sales skyrocket into the billions of dollars each year. VCR sales reach 1 million in 1981 as Americans discover a convenient new source of entertainment. Video rental stores seem to appear on every corner. Prices of VCRs dropped nearly $1,000 and sales climb steadily. Taping shows off the air is illegal, but most people ignore the law. Years later, the Supreme Court reverses the ban. And from Japan, the Sony Walkman is the new fashionable headgear. Four years after being launched, unmanned space probe Voyager 2 finally reaches Saturn and relays to Earth the most detailed and beautiful photographs ever taken of the ringed planet. They show that Saturn is swept by 1,000-mile-per-hour winds and that it is ringed by more than 20 moons. Back in Washington, Reagan's political arm-twisting and media blitz are convincing many legislators to join the bandwagon and pass his controversial tax and budget-cutting bills.
With me also, this package will put us back on the road to a sound economy, with lower inflation, more growth, and a government that lives within its means. Our goal is a very simple one: to rebuild this nation so that individual Americans can once again be the masters of their own destiny.
I think that if we bring his proposal to the Senate floor, that he will overwhelmingly be supported by the Congress.
But not everyone agrees.
Know that there's fundamental doubts about whether they'll ever get a balanced budget the way they're going. And these doubts are nowhere more powerful than within the White House, within the Executive Office building, within the Department of the Treasury.
Called for an end.
In late July, Reagan goes before the nation to make a final pitch for his economic recovery package.
Because of what you did, Republicans and Democrats in the Congress came together and passed the most sweeping cutbacks in the history of the federal budget. Right now, members of the House and Senate are meeting in a conference committee to reconcile the differences between the two budget-cutting bills passed by the House and Senate. When they finish, all Americans will benefit from savings of approximately $140 billion in reduced government costs over just the next 3 years.
The bill sails through Congress, setting fiscal priorities for the decade. Reagan wins a decisive victory over the Democrats. The House Speaker is in the minority.
A great salesman. We don't read his figures the way he tells them. As a matter of fact, his bill is geared for the wealthy of America.
Across the Atlantic, more political turmoil. Spain is in a new era after the death of dictator Francisco Franco. For the past 6 years, King Juan Carlos has been guiding the country into the modern age. But a serious threat to their fledgling freedom comes in February, when a brash lieutenant colonel leads 200 civil guards in an attempted coup d'etat against Parliament, taking 350 legislators hostage. The army remains loyal to the king and refuses to join the rebellion. Juan Carlos appears on TV at 1 a.m. and assures the nervous nation that freedom will prevail. The next morning, rebels release the senators and surrender.
We thought that what we had to do is to fight for democracy and to have and to be out of the parliament and not forced inside the parliament. We're going to have a meeting tomorrow of the parliament to continue our work.
First, I would like to say that we are gratified that democracy in Spain has survived.
But not unchallenged. In May, 3 of the king's guards are assassinated in Madrid by Basque terrorists seeking independence for their mountainous area in northwest Spain. The whole nation conducts a 2-minute period of silence in support of the new constitution, and democracy does prevail. Britain of the old empire. It's the image they prefer to see. But there is another reality, a legacy of hostility breaking into the open. In British Northern Ireland, the centuries-old conflict between Catholics and Protestants continues the heritage of hate. To gain political status, jailed members of the Irish Republican Army, led by Bobby Sands, go on hunger strikes in the infamous H Block of Mays Prison. Sands, a month into his strike, is elected to Parliament and receives worldwide attention.
Sands, Bobby, anti-H Block, Armagh, political prisoner, 30,000. 492.
There can be no question of political status
for someone who is serving a sentence for crime. Crime is crime is crime. It is not political, it is crime.
But after 66 days, he dies. Catholics mourn, and even more violence erupts in the streets between them and the British Army. 1981 is a year of tense struggle for the Irish. In all, 10 IRA members die in prison. More die in the streets. Funerals are the most frequent public events of the year. In England, disorders of another kind break out. Residents of Brixton, a predominantly black section of London, go on a 3-day rampage of rioting in reaction to harsh police practices in their neighborhood. It's the worst violence England has seen since World War II.
Racism in America is a hot potato subject. You can identify it. In England, racism is very lukewarm. You know, you can be victimized in all aspects without a person telling you anything about your color. It's very, very subtle.
What has been happening over the last couple of weeks is young blacks and young whites joining together to attack who they see as being symbolic of authority, which is the police.
Some call this a race riot, but many say the issue is poverty and government insensitivity.
You can have war, because there's so many people that have been picked up in Manchester of the ghettos of the street and searched, took down to the police stations, beaten up. It's just unbelievable, and the people in high places seem to think it doesn't go on.
In other cities across England, the Brixton riots become a model for more public displays of frustration. And the story repeats itself for months. But in a year of troubles, there is a joyous transition.
I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on. And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
32-year-old Charles, Prince of Wales and heir to the British throne, becomes engaged to 19-year-old Lady Diana Spencer, ending years of speculation about the future queen.
With this ring,
I thee wed.
I thee wed.
In an historic first, Sandra Day O'Connor is Reagan's surprise choice for nomination to the United States Supreme Court. The Arizona judge shares the president's conservative views on many legal issues. She is unanimously confirmed by the Senate in September and takes her place on the bench. It's against the law for government workers to call a work stoppage. So when federal air traffic controllers begin an illegal strike in August, Reagan, a former union leader himself, reacts swiftly.
I must tell those who failed to report for duty this morning, they are in violation of the law, and if they do not report for work within 48 hours, they have forfeited their jobs and will be terminated.
All striking air traffic controllers face an important decision, perhaps the most important career decision of their lives.
I guess I'm going to be looking for another job in 48 hours. That's not going to stop me, and I don't think it's going to stop the rest of the controllers across the United States. If anything, it's going to strengthen their resolve.
As you can see, this is a good evidence of solidarity on a day like this. There's a busload of our people here to support our brothers and sisters in PATCO because they've got a great deal of courage. As much courage today, perhaps in 1981, as some of the founders of the labor movement had in the early days.
We say fight back! Reagan says cut back! We say fight back!
Most of the 13,000 union members defy the order. And, good to his word, Reagan gives them the axe. Some even go to jail. Alarmed, union leaders criticize Reagan, but he won't back down.
I think it's, as I said, brutal, unnecessary overkill. I think there was ample opportunity to continue discussions without recourse to that kind of tactics.
There seems to be an attitude, and the attitude is to provoke confrontation. And if you would look back at some of the actions in the private sector, there's just an anti-union attitude with this administration. There's no doubt about that.
For weeks, flights are delayed or canceled, but there are no serious accidents as supervisors man the towers. The union is broken, and weeks later, the government begins hiring new controllers. And the former union members have to start new lives.
Well, I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd be pumping gas.
Hardball labor problems also upset America's favorite summer pastime. This year, major league players and owners find themselves deadlocked at the bargaining table over free agent compensation.
I'm naturally hopeful. I'm solidly behind our committee, but I'm naturally hopeful, as Ed is, that cool heads will prevail and they'll sit down at that table and negotiate till they come up with a solution.
Then, the players call their own, strike three, and they're out. After 49 days, an agreement is reached, but neither side gains much ground.
Baseball's back on the headlines. We're going to play ball.
I think every ball club in the major leagues, really has been hurt financially by this. No one has won by this strike. The only people that are going to win now are the fans because it's over with.
It's about time to stop playing baseball.
Baseball resumes with the first split season in history. The Los Angeles Dodgers go on to defeat the New York Yankees in the World Series, and the strike is forgotten.
Get it up!
Hollywood supplies a vintage crop of blockbusters in '81. Steven Spielberg's swashbuckling Indiana Jones is introduced in the wildly successful Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Happy birthday to you.
On Golden Pond brings together two Hollywood legends, Katharine Hepburn and Henry Fonda, and his daughter Jane in one of the year's most touching films.
I gather you've recently become secretary to Mrs. Pulteney.
Meryl Streep and Jeremy Irons steal the scene in The French Lieutenant's Woman. And from England comes the film that sweeps the Academy Awards, Chariots of Fire, an emotionally gripping story of Olympic runners. A desperate manhunt has Atlanta gripped by fear.
We've got fiber evidence that's common between a great number of the bodies. And this evidence is unique enough and numerically significant enough so that it leaves no doubt that there is a correlation between the bodies, and that means that if there's a common thread running through the bodies, through the evidence on the bodies, there is also a good indication that we have a common killer.
Over the past 2 years, 28 young black men have been mysteriously murdered, and no one feels safe.
There's reason to be afraid. You don't know when somebody's just gonna grab you. Like those kids, they didn't know who gonna grab them. They just probably just walking to the store and somebody just pulled them in a car or something like that, and they just dead the next day.
On a night stakeout, police hear a splash in a river and stop 23-year-old Wayne Williams. A trip to his house turns up incriminating evidence. Williams is then arrested and charged with 2 of the 28 homicides. The disappearances stop immediately, and Williams is later convicted of murder. Also in Atlanta, the hunt for an even more deadly killer is just beginning. At the Centers for Disease Control, doctors are puzzled by the first cases of a highly unusual breakdown of the body's immune system, causing agonizing deaths among some young men. By the end of 1981, 296 people have died, marking the beginning of an awful rampage. First called gay cancer, it will be a year before this disease has its official name, AIDS. Poland staggers through a tumultuous year as the new independent labor party, Solidarity, led by Lech Walesa, gains more supporters and presses communist leaders for reforms. From January to December, strikes rock the shaky economy as the power struggle between Solidarity and the government nearly paralyzes the country.
Mniej, tym samym znacznie wyciągnie z nich możliwie szybko praktyczne wnioski.
Communists shake up their leadership and install the tough General Wojciech Jaruzelski at the helm. More strikes by Solidarity bring the economy to its knees and get Jaruzelski in trouble. Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev mounts Warsaw Pact maneuvers in Poland to send a message to Walesa and his 10 million followers. They do not heed the warning. The real crisis comes in December, when the communists declare martial law.
They have been betrayed by their own government. The men who rule them and their totalitarian allies fear the very freedom that the Polish people cherish. They have answered the stirrings of liberty with brute force, killings, mass arrests, and the setting up of concentration camps. Lech Walesa and other Solidarity leaders are imprisoned, their fate unknown. Factories, mines, universities, and homes have been assaulted.
The world watches nervously as Solidarity's decade-long challenge to communist domination continues to be played out on the streets. And 10 months into 1981, there is another attack on a world leader. At a military parade outside Cairo, Muslim extremists attack Egyptian President Anwar Sadat's reviewing stand. Sadat is assassinated. Leader of Egypt since 1970, Sadat began as a man of war. In 1967 and again in 1973, he fought 2 bloody and unsuccessful battles with Israel.
Sadat is an implacable enemy of Israel. This is also the truth. He is no fool, but he's an enemy.
In a dramatic shift, he became a champion of peace when he broke with his Arab brothers and made a historic journey to Jerusalem in 1977 to begin the healing process with Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. Brought together again by President Jimmy Carter, Sadat and Begin signed the Camp David Accords, bringing a final peace between the 2 old enemies. But his embrace of Israel made Sadat a marked man for militant Muslims who condemned his pro-Western politics. Undeterred, Sadat pressed Egypt's peaceful role among Arab nations until the end. Three former U.S. presidents and other leaders come to Cairo to pay homage to Sadat's bravery and compassion.
I should like them to write on my tomb, he has lived for peace and he has died for principles.
At a special White House ceremony, President Truman personally pins the insignia of a 5-star general on the shoulders of General Omar Bradley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Long known as the GI's general, Bradley is the 9th American officer to hold this high rank.
Sing for me. Sing me that song.
In this place, we're all together now. Figuring out who's crazy. Then afterwards, we go out and have a nice coffee.
When the clock strikes 12, we'll cool off and start rocking around again. We're gonna rock tonight. We're gonna rock till broad daylight.
And it's kind of nice to know that the man who never rested on canvas now sleeps on clouds. God bless you, Joe. The fight's over, and you walked out of the ring with dignity and decency.
As one boxing great departs, another legend leaves the ring. 39-year-old Muhammad Ali loses a bout to young Canadian Trevor Berbick. The champ calls it quits.
Just have to face it. Nothing lasts ever, not even Muhammad Ali.
And the ring gains a new hero in Sugar Ray Leonard when he wins the welterweight title in a fierce bout with Tommy Hearns. The charismatic and cocky Leonard walks away with $8 million and America's heart.
Sugar Ray, have you got any ideas about how to balance the budget?
Well, not yet. All it takes is a good punch. That's all it takes.
How about that, Mr. President?
I'm going to rely on him. Of course, if we get too desperate, we might ask him to do a few benefit fights.
But winning America's hearts is getting harder for the president.
Solidarity forever, our union
The economy continues to sink, and no one seems to know what to do about it. Reagan does his best to put his supply-side recovery plan in the best light.
We're just starting down a road that I believe will lead us out of the economic swamp we've been in for so long. It'll take time for the effect of the tax rate reductions to be felt in increased savings, productivity, and new jobs. It will also take time for the budget cuts to reduce the deficits which have brought us near runaway inflation and ruinous interest rates. The important thing now is to hold to a firm, steady course.
But according to Budget Director David Stockman, there is no steady course. In a highly embarrassing magazine interview, he is quoted as saying he didn't really believe the Reagan economic package would do all it was supposed to do, and that the supply-side theory is just a trickle-down economics for the rich.
My visit to the Oval Office for lunch with the president was more in the nature of a visit to the woodshed after supper. He was not happy about the way this is developed, and properly so. He was very chagrined that these interpretations have been developed and these questions have been raised about his purposes, his intents, and his belief.
Comedians have a field day.
After the magazine came out, Reagan ran into him in the hall, and he said, "Does the name Benedict Arnold mean anything to you?"
1981, a year of happiness and hope. A year of tragedy and transition. But looking beyond planet Earth, NASA launches America into a new era. The first reusable space shuttle, Columbia, blasts off from Cape Canaveral, carrying astronauts on their quest to discover the deeper mysteries of our universe.
America's first space shuttle, and the shuttle has cleared the tower.